anybody wants to share, sorry, I remember being recorded. If anyone wants to share any recent state or local policy wins, and usually we do in the last month, but since we skipped it last month and since we didn't meet all year long, I'm just going to say, you know, anything that's happened this year that was a state or local policy win that you have not shared on a previous community practice call, we would love to hear about. So I'm going to open it up now. If anyone wants to share that, you can do it either in the chat or just unmute yourselves. And then I'm also going to put in the chat again our link to the whiteboard and our link to the poll. And then I will also just preview for you that most of our time today is going to be spent on a presentation on the year in review and the year ahead for federal and state laws. We have some great speakers. We've got Heather Hanna and Cameron Rifkin joining us from the National Conference of State Legislators. Thank you guys so much. And we have SchoolHouse Connection's own Alianne Anderson telling us about a little bit more of the federal policy. And then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. And Patricia, you had, I think, wanted to do an intro. I might kick it back to you to do that now.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I did want to take a moment to introduce our new Director of State Policy. I am so thrilled to have him with us. I can't even tell you how happy I am. So Rod Montz, if you don't mind taking a moment to introduce yourself to our community of practice, and you can tell us a little bit about your background if you like.
Thank you, Patricia. I'm equally happy to be aboard, although I think you may have eclipsed me in enthusiasm. I am smiling as much inside. It's great to be with you all. I come to SchoolHouse Connection from the ACLU of Michigan, where I did community engagement and coalition building work around a number of issues, including a number that touched on education and juvenile justice. And I think there is great intersection to some of the experiences I've had and what SchoolHouse Connection does. I certainly look forward to kind of elevating the coalition building and community engagement work that I was doing across the state of Michigan to the national level, and having an opportunity to work with you all and others in many states across the country to help youth and young adults.
Thank you, Rod. Welcome.
Thank you both. Go ahead,
Lisa, I know that you were asking people to share their policy wins and things they're excited about, and maybe I could break the ice. It might be cheating for me to say something since we're sponsoring this community of practice, but if it helps as an icebreaker, I think one of the things that I personally am most excited about and maybe proud of this year from SchoolHouse Connection's perspective is a piece of legislation we worked on in Nevada in coalition with My Brother's Keepers Alliance and Children's Alliance Advocacy Center and the Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth and the Nevada Homeless Alliance. It was really kind of a group effort around trying to help intervene in the school to prison pipeline and limit removal of children from school for different kinds of disciplinary measures if those children are experiencing homelessness or foster care, and also taking a close look at all of those disproportionalities that impact students of color in particular. So that law actually is not in effect quite yet this school year. So I think what we need to do, our challenge this school year now is going to be to start working on getting the implementation procedures and protocols in place so that it can really be successful for students and for schools next school year. But I'll throw that one out. That was SB 354 in Nevada. And that's definitely a piece of work that I think was just great because so many different organizations came together in unity around an issue that affects so many of the students we work with.
Thanks, Patricia. Would anyone else like to share a policy win from this year? It can be state level, it can be local, it can be really anything that you consider a win. And if you want, you can share in the chat, but we also welcome you to unmute and share aloud. Okay, I don't want to put people too much on the spot, so I'll just put out there that you can continue to share those within the chat. We can circle back to it after. I know we're asking a lot of you this session because we also have the poll and we're welcoming Rod. So think about, reflect back on your policy journey this year, and please do message us or put it in the chat if you want to share a win. And then we can also kind of circle back to that at the end of the call. But we do have two great experts here, so I want to make sure we get a chance to hear from them. So we are going to start with Heather and Cameron from NCSL. You should be able to share your screen, but if you have any trouble, let me know. And thank you guys.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Hanna. Sorry, it took me a second there. I'm outside of my normal workstation, so adapting is part of today. If I do the presenter view, are you able to see the slides large size, Patricia?
Yeah, it looks good to me, Heather.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Heather Hanna. I'm an Associate Director with the Children and Families Program at the National Conference of State Legislators, or NCSL. And I'm here with my colleague, Cameron. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Cameron Rifkin. I am a policy associate at NCSL with the Children and Families Program. I tend to focus on housing and homelessness, economic mobility, family law, and child support. Great to be here.
Thanks, Cameron. You had a good segue for me. So there are about 7 different policy areas. So we're part of the policy research arm of NCSL, and there's about 7 different areas, one of which is children and families. So our work really crosses across all of those policy areas, as you might imagine. But we primarily focus in on early childhood, child welfare, child support, and family law, housing and homelessness, and economic mobility and/or security, however you want to look at it or however we're approaching it. And so we're here today to talk with you about the youth homelessness legislation over the last year. But before we do that, I did want to spend a few minutes, if you're not familiar with the National Conference of State Legislators, just telling you a little bit about what we do. So it kind of grounds you in the frame that we bring to this conversation. So the National Conference of State Legislators is the country's most trusted bipartisan organization, serving legislators and legislative staff for more than 40 years. We promote policy innovation, create opportunities for lawmakers to share knowledge, and ensure that state legislatures have a strong, cohesive voice in the federal system. And we do this because we believe in the importance of the legislative institution and know when our states are strong, our nation is strong. So some of the ways that we do that are here on the screen, but we are the only organization that serves all 7,383 legislators and more than 25,000 legislative staff. And some of the things that we do here at NCSL are tracking different issue areas, over 1,400 issue areas, from criminal justice reform, education, healthcare, transportation, to more obscure issues. And that's where we come in from the children and families side. So we primarily track issues related to children and families. We also build connection. So NCSL brings legislators and staff together from both sides of the aisle to really tackle and discuss difficult problems and find reasonable solutions. We provide a myriad of different training opportunities, specializing in professional development that's specifically tailored for legislators and legislative staff. And we also have a voice at DC. So we advocate on Capitol Hill on behalf of states and fight against preemption for the 10th Amendment and maintaining federalism. And we have 8 committees that are very similar to state committees that are working on particular issues. So in our case, we focus a lot on health and human services issues. And then we have meetings to create regular platforms for leading discussions on some of the nation's most pressing issues. And we have a variety of different small and large events. So internally, we host fellows programs to support building the knowledge among legislators, but then we have large events like Legislative Summit that was just here in Tampa last week. So with that, now that you have like a little bit of grounding in what NCSL does and how we approach the legislative system and issues at the federal level, I'm going to turn it over to Cameron, who, like he said, focuses in a lot on housing and homelessness issues, particularly youth homelessness as well. And he's going to walk us through some of the legislative trends that we've seen over the last year and kind of what that looks like across states.
Thank you, Heather. Yeah, so we will talk a little bit about what our research shows in terms of legislative trends for this most recent year. They kind of get bulked into a few different categories that we'll go through. I believe we have some time for questions at the end of the presentation, so feel free to throw some stuff in the chat or jot it down, whatever works best. But based on our research, we have identified 23 states who introduced 72 bills related to youth homelessness. And out of those, 11 of the states enacted 19 new laws. And we'll dig a little bit into those further. We're also going to drop something into the chat or get it to y'all one way or the other. We have additional documentation detailing those laws a little bit more in depth. So I just see something in the chat, so we'll check that out in a second. So one main category is supporting higher education for students. And so states have created additional housing opportunities for students experiencing homelessness. And a main way they've done this is assigned liaisons at higher education institutions to support these students. It can be a whole new position. It can be a pre-existing condition. A position already there. It could be someone in the financial ed department, but a lot of states have really tried to bolster and support higher education for students. And we see that continuing on, and we'll touch on that a little bit more as well. Next slide. Oh, thank you. This is a visual aid. I'm a visual person, so maps are a huge help for me. So the states in green are states that had existing laws supporting students in higher ed. And the states in red are states that enacted laws this past year with similar initiatives to support homeless students in higher education. So we can see that Illinois, Arkansas, California, and Washington all have created some new laws. Specifically, Arkansas and Illinois, as mentioned, established liaison positions for community college and higher education institutions to help support students at risk of homelessness or experiencing homelessness. California created a pilot program, I believe specifically in LA County, for students experiencing homelessness, and Washington expanded their current program similar to the one enacted in California. Next slide, thank you. Another main theme and trend that we noticed was expanding health access for youth experiencing homelessness. So states have expanded that through a variety of ways, including allowing youth experiencing homelessness to access medical care without parental consent. And sometimes that is just basic routine stuff. It kind of varies by state, the level of medical care that they can access. And some other kind of administrative stuff includes eliminating any requirement for proof of homelessness to be notarized. That was kind of a common theme we saw, was abolishing those bureaucratic administrative barriers for youth experiencing homelessness to kind of help prove their homelessness and access medical care. This is a map representing kind of what we just talked about, the access to medical care. So a lot of states had laws in place to allow youth experiencing homelessness to access healthcare without parental consent, or related laws to kind of help support that. There were a couple states, North Dakota and Nevada, who passed laws this most recent legislative year in 2021 related to helping support unaccompanied minors access medical care. Minimizing the effects of mobilization. So this was a really common one that we saw in a variety of ways. States kind of tackled it in a different way. I believe Patricia actually mentioned the law in Nevada, which you'll see, I believe, in our map a little later. But that is a good example of one way states have addressed youth and students in kind of K through 12 education, minimize mobilization, minimize the effects of mobilization to help them graduate high school. And so that includes the number of days homeless youth can stay in shelters, as Patricia mentioned, diminishing out of school suspensions or expulsions, with particular focus on foster youth or youth experiencing homelessness. And then there have also been some outreach programs either created or expanded upon to help students experiencing homelessness access services, apply for higher education applications. A few examples are Maine specifically did something similar to Nevada to increase high school graduation rates and reduce out of school suspensions. And California expanded their outreach program, which I think we can see in the next slide, Heather. Thank you so much. Yeah, so in the purple, states that had laws pre-existing to 2021 to kind of help minimize the effects of mobilization. And then the states in red, Nevada, California, and Maine, as mentioned, passed additional. To be clear, sometimes these states in the different colors also might have had pre-existing laws, but they passed additional laws in 2021. So we wanted to highlight that as well. So those were the three big ones this year. If we'd like to go to the next slide, I think we have a few more categories for y'all. Waiving fees and reducing barriers to records. So we saw this a lot. And for youth experiencing homelessness, access to vital records such as birth certificates and other documentation like that has been a main focus for states. A few states also assisted with waiving fees for driver's license courses and exams and the administrative stuff for that. So that was another common theme we saw, was to assist with the financial barriers for youth experiencing homelessness to access kind of basic necessary records for themselves. Similarly, some operational improvements and administrative changes. States have expanded some other grant opportunities for agencies working with homeless youth. They've enhanced background screenings at homeless youth shelters and other programs or agencies that work with youth experiencing homelessness. And then they've also included annual reporting. So included in legislation has been some requirement to study, youth experiencing homelessness, the effects of it, report on it to the state legislature, and then kind of build a program from there. So there have been, again, a variety of ways states have addressed youth homelessness in their own way and to kind of tailor it to their communities. This this map is specifically for 2021. So the states in green are states that enacted laws related to operational or administrative improvements, and the states in pink are states that enacted new laws waiving various fees and reducing barriers to records. So we can see that Nevada, New Mexico, and Texas enacted laws waiving fees, and Maine, Oregon, California improved upon some administrative and operational, similar to background screenings and things of that nature.
And I'll just jump in. I know there's been some chat going on, and I'm sure everyone's clamoring to know kind of what that looks like in each state. We will drop into the chat here when we get done with this presentation a PDF that has all the legislation in each state, and then it's linked as well. So if you want to dig in a little bit more to what that looks like in a particular state, we'll have that for you.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. Sorry, not monitoring the chat quite as much while presenting, but happy to follow up with anyone who has questions, concerns. If there's more specificity you're looking for, we'd definitely be happy to connect and follow up. Please, like I said, keep dropping them in the chat. Let us know, whatever works for y'all. And we wanted to also kind of look towards the future. And so in terms of pending legislation, you can get a little tricky. There are some carryover states who have different legislative trends and calendar dates, but overall there was about 10 states who had 36 pending bills related to youth homelessness. And it's important to note that sometimes legislation takes a few rounds to get through. So just because something wasn't approved on the first kind of go around, it doesn't mean, it won't get enacted or passed eventually down the line. It's a pretty common part of the process to tweak and sharpen and finesse, various components of bills, especially, if they're pretty expansive. And so 10 states have 36 pending bills, and they're similar to the trends that we noted with 2021. There's a very heavy focus on K through 12 education. I actually think New York had one specifically for pre-K, but a lot of states have dedicated some legislation to improving educational opportunities. That means, increasing access to supportive services, helping with tutoring, helping with, extracurricular activities, again, applying to, post-secondary, higher education, or trade schools, GEDs, things of that nature. Outreach was another major component of pending legislation. So just expanding the connection to students and youth experiencing homelessness, enhancing programs that do that, that kind of tied back in with the annual reports and completing some studies. As mentioned earlier, identification and records. So we saw a few states introduce stuff in 2021. There are several other states that are looking to eliminate fees for vital records and similar documentation. And then shelter services. So that is another component that's pretty varied depending on state. It could mean expanding the number of days that youth could live in a homeless shelter. It could be changing the definition of what exactly that means. Enhanced background checks, increased funding. So a variety of stuff, but increasing shelter services capacity for youth experiencing homelessness. And those seem to be the major trends that we noted. Thank you. And I will pass it back to Heather. She will discuss a little bit about youth homelessness and the American Rescue Plan Act.
Yeah, thanks, Cameron, for setting us up with all those good legislative trends. And I think that point that Cameron made around just the iterative process in the legislature is common. So just know that pending doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't going somewhere. It takes some time for legislation to move forward. And sometimes those iterative processes make the legislation that much stronger for a state. So all part of the process. But I wanted to talk a little bit about youth homelessness and ARPA, as I'm sure ARPA is really touched all facets of infrastructure and childcare and homelessness and evictions. So in the context of youth homelessness, just know that there are a lot of funds coming down, and you're probably more well-versed in this in terms of like on the ground. And so there are a variety of funds that are available to address youth homelessness, including the $350 billion in local fiscal recovery funds. Those can be used by states, counties, and cities and tribal governments for homeless prevention. And some of that might look like acquiring hotels or converting them to transitional housing, bolstering education opportunities for homeless youth. So they're really flexible, and states can use them in a variety of different ways. And a lot of those are being funneled down to the local level. So just know that there's those funds that are out there broadly around homelessness and can be used for youth homelessness potentially. And then there's $123 billion in ESSER funds that are providing districts with emergency relief funds to address the impacts of COVID-19, particularly on elementary and secondary schools. And those can be used for McKinney-Vento protections for homeless children, planning and coordinating food delivery, technology, materials, mental health for homeless students. So again, a variety of different ways. And we are not an expert in the education funds, but we'd be happy to connect you with our education program, who is doing a lot more tracking regarding those funds. And then specifically, there are $800 million to identify homeless children and youth and provide those children and youth with wraparound services to address the challenges of COVID-19 and enable those children and youth to attend school. And so when I was looking into this, I found a great website, and I'll drop it into the chat in just a bit, where you can actually pull up all of the state plans by the Department of Education and see what's going on in each state regarding these funds. And each of these funds have different timelines, in which case they have to obligate them and liquidate them. So to take a look into that, just know that these funds are out there and they are being rolled across states. Some of them require legislative approval in some cases, it depends on the state, and some of them are just going to a particular department based on how that fund is set up. And then there are provisions which you all may or may not be familiar with around the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit, which may have benefits for youth and young adults, particularly those with young children. So they've lowered the age at which you can access CTC and increase the benefit amount. And they've also incorporated within the earned income tax credit, childless workers, as well as lowering the age and just really expanding access. So just know that those could be a potential arm that youth homeless could be able to access. And then NCSL broadly is monitoring how states are using these funds, these federal funds for relief of COVID-19, and thinking and looking about how these are being allocated across states. So we were also asked to talk a little bit about connecting with legislators, as this is our base, our membership base. And I just wanted to leave you with a couple of pointers as you take these trends and these kind of things that we've shared with you, and you move into the next year and thinking about how you're sharing this information with your legislators. So my first tip would just be to really understand when your state legislature is in session. And we'll also include these slides, and we'll throw into the chat as well a state legislative session calendar, so you can specifically pull up when your state is in regular session or special session. It's very helpful to just really see when policymakers are together and making these important decisions. It's always best to contact your legislator's office or their scheduler to really find out when they're available and what time they have available to be able to speak with you. And then prepare for your meeting. So come with information that's relevant to the topic. Data is always welcome by legislators. They really like to dig into what the data is saying and how that reflects, in the constituents that they're serving. And it's always helpful too, when you're meeting with your legislator, to include, how this is impacting their district, because those are their direct constituents. And then always be sure to follow up. So a lot of times you'll have one of these meetings and they may have some additional questions as you're sharing this information with them. And they're eager to learn alongside you. And so follow up is always key. So with that, we thought we would close with just a couple of resources to leave you with as you're kind of digging into this presentation and thinking about what this means. The first would be the Housing and Homelessness database. And so all of the data that we've shared with you here today came from our Housing and Homelessness database. It's very robust. Cameron does a phenomenal job of keeping it updated. And it has points, where it's definitely more busy than others when we're in session. But you can search, I think it goes back 3 years of housing and homelessness data or legislation. And you can also narrow by topic. So if you're looking specifically for just youth homelessness, you can narrow in on that. If there's a particular topic, you can also narrow in on that as well. We also have a great youth homelessness overview. It's geared towards legislators and really helping them understand the issue, and provides data and resources that NCSL has gathered. So it's a good place to help you when you're speaking with your legislator about this issue. We also recently did a webinar on the American Rescue Plan Act and youth homelessness, so we'll have that linked there as well. And it broadly focused on economic security, education, and really how we can combine the youth homelessness issue with the opportunity that the American Rescue Plan provides in helping legislators understand where those opportunities are. And then we also have a great Legis brief on partnering to end youth homelessness that again is really framed from informing legislators on that particular issue. So it may be just helpful as you're talking with state legislators about the issue and helping them to understand it. And I also wanted to mention that we have a really exciting program that we're building. Cameron and I are working on this right now. And we will be hosting the NCSL Youth Fellows Program in 2022. It will be the kickoff year. And it's really built off of our successful Early Childhood Fellows Program, which has been in existence for over 10 years. And this is a cohort model. So we bring together about 30 to 35 legislators and legislative staff to learn about issues and policies focused on youth homelessness for this particular fellows program. And right now what we're doing is we're building an advisory group of national experts, which SchoolHouse Connection has graciously agreed to join us and provide their perspective. And they're helping us to understand the landscape and to help inform the curriculum that will then be moving forward as we come into the summer months. So just know that legislators are interested in this issue, and we're helping them to understand the primary issues regarding youth homelessness and the ways in which they can plug into this issue. So with that, we have contact information for you. If there are pieces of legislation that you're interested in, or you want to dig in more to those legislative trends, like Cameron said, you can definitely reach out to us.
Thank you so much.
We're happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Heather and Cameron. That was terrific. I think we have plenty of time if people want to ask a few questions now. I want to make sure we have time because Eliane from SchoolHouse has some great information to share too, but I think it would be fine if anyone has any questions specifically on Heather and Cameron's presentation that you'd like to ask now. Please either put them in the chat or unmute. While you're thinking about that, I will note that I put a question in the chat for everyone just about ARPA because there's been so much interest in ARPA. I'm curious if anyone in this group has been able in their own communities or states to advise or speak to how some of those funds should be used. I think that would be an interesting thing for your peers to hear. And then also there's a link in there to some advocacy resources, including several of the NCSL resources that Heather mentioned, but we'll also make sure that everyone has access to the PowerPoint so you can access all of their links as well. I think we'll go ahead and let Eliane speak, and then we can definitely take questions for all three presenters after that as well. Thanks so much.
Sure, thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone. While I try to figure out how to share my screen on Zoom, which I've actually never done before, coincidentally, I just want to say I'm so happy to be with you all today. Thank you so much for having me here, Lisa and Patricia. My name is Eliane Anderson, and I am the Policy and Outreach Associate for SchoolHouse Connection. So I work closely with Barbara Duffield on our team as well on federal policy advocacy. So yeah, I'm happy to share with you all some quick updates for what's been going on the Hill. Okay, it looks like we're almost there. Okay, so everyone, it looks like I will have to leave the call, unfortunately, for a second and rejoin before I'm able to share my screen because of my system preferences and all of that stuff. But I hope you all.
Wait, you know what may be faster? If you want to email it to me, I can share my screen and then advance the slides for you. Do you prefer that? Is that quicker?
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa.
No problem. Okay, while we're doing that, I'm going to ask everyone to take this 5 minutes to fill out our year-end poll. I'm going to put the link in the chat again, and then I'm going to go grab Eliane's slides, and then I'm going to share them with you.
Thanks, Lisa and Aliane. I actually did have a question for Heather and Cameron, just a quick one maybe while we have this lull. And I just was wondering if you all have ever sort of looked back with a bit more of a historical perspective. My feeling is that it seems like over the past few years, youth homelessness has become more of an issue in state legislatures, but maybe that's just my feeling. Do you have a feel for how state legislative action has changed on this issue maybe over the past decade or so?
Cameron, do you want to take it or do you want me to kick us off?
It's a wonderful question. I'm not sure we have that long of historical data readily available. We have a little bit more recent. I think on a couple of those maps you saw maybe the healthcare one is a bit more common and probably has a little bit more historical backing. But in terms of like, yeah, that term, like longitudinal, I don't know if we have that readily available. We'd be happy to look further into it and provide more insight. I think our information is a bit more recent.
Yeah, so our database goes back 3 years, if I recall, but I'll say anecdotally, it seems to be that state legislatures are focused in much more on housing and homelessness. And, you know, it seems like that was at a much more local level. And just because, you know, it is such a pressing issue and we are seeing, you know, housing increases, right? And homelessness being more prevalent. You know, I think that state legislatures are really seeing this as an issue that's more broadly state-based and working with local counterparts in some cases. So I don't have, you know, 10 years of longitudinal data, but I think broadly speaking, we see that state legislatures are much more involved in housing and homelessness policy than they may have been in previous years.
I'd agree. I'd say even we see some data with the COVID-19 pandemic and stuff related to housing and homelessness has certainly increased. So agreed, but yeah, youth homelessness probably even in just the last 2 years or so has seen an increase in attention.
Thank you.
And I think I can now share the PowerPoint. Let's see how this goes. Oh, I'm having an issue. I've done this lots of times. All right, let's try one more time.
I'm sorry about the technical difficulties, everyone. I wish I had some good waiting music that I could play.
I think I got it. Here we go. Okay. So just let me know when I should advance.
Sure.
And we'll do it hopefully in full screen mode.
Okay, awesome. So welcome everyone to this portion of your state policy community of practice meeting, a federal policy update. And we can go to the next slide. And again, my name is Aliane Anderson. So just a couple of federal legislative priorities just to make you guys aware. So these are two of our top priorities right now that we're working on. The first one being flexible funding to support homeless children and youth, and the other one being removing barriers to higher education for homeless and foster youth. And we can go to the next slide. So speaking of flexible funding, I know that Heather and Cameron mentioned this in their presentation, but we wanted to mention it as well. So this is one of the crowning accomplishments for our federal policy team for the year 2021, which was our advocacy for the American Rescue Plan Homeless Children and Youth Funds, which of course, as Heather mentioned, is the $800 million investment into the education of homeless children and youth that was included in the American Rescue Plan Act back in early March. And this $800 million signifies a larger investment than the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program has seen in the past 10 years. Can you imagine like this single appropriation being larger than what the program has gotten over the past 10 years? So it was huge. And then one of the things that got us to get these funds was the case that we were able to make with data that was included in a report that we released last fall entitled Lost in the Mass Shuffle and Virtual Void, Children and Youth Experiencing Homelessness Amidst the Pandemic. It's a wonderful report. It's full of so much information of what education was like for homeless children and youth during the pandemic. In that same report, we found out that there was an estimated 420,000 students that were just completely disconnected from school. So it's really, really interesting. But just a quick shout out to all the liaisons who participated in that last year and also this year. So this funding, it provides flexible funding to support the identification and enrollment of homeless children and youth, and also provide them with wraparound services. So as I mentioned, one of our top priorities is flexible funding, and this funding is more flexible than even regular EHCY or Education for Homeless Children and Youth funds. So going forward, we really want to see this level of investment sustained because there were so many school districts that were able to receive funds specifically for homeless children and youth who have never gotten these funds ever, never received an EHCY subgrant. So that is one of our top priorities. And going to the next slide, please. And speaking of funding for the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program, we're going to talk a little bit about the federal budget for fiscal year 2022. So our ask this year was $300 million, which, even though we didn't get this, we were happy to see that despite the fact that the House proposed a very minimal increase, the previous funding level was 106.5 million, and the House back in July proposed 116.6. The Senate recently proposed a 38% increase, which of $40 million, which would bring it up to 146.5 million. So that's one of the things that we're working on in our advocacy right now, to get the funding level to be as high as possible, because next year we are going so much higher. So at least to have it a bit more consistent. For the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act program, this also saw a little bit of an increase as well in both the House proposed increase being 149.7 million and the Senate proposing 149.9. So we definitely know which of the two we prefer. And even though the final numbers have not yet been determined for either of these two programs or for any federal program, to be honest, for the fiscal year 2022 budget, we are still advocating, but the numbers have not been finalized as yet, because there's been a whole lot of intra-party and just general partisan conflicts in terms of what the top line numbers are supposed to be for the bills, the funding deadline, like before the funding runs out, and we may have a government shutdown, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard happen at several points in time over the years through different administrations. So to avoid that, the Congress has to fund federal programs by December 3rd. If not, then they will most likely resort to issuing what's called a continuing resolution, which would mean that funding levels stay the same for fiscal year 2022, at least for a certain period of time, until they're able to finalize a new budget. So everything would be kind of frozen at the same levels that they were at for 2021. And we do not want that. So, one of the things that we're doing is reaching out to members of Congress, reaching out to senators. And if you all want to get involved in that as well, let me know. I'm your girl. And you'll see my email at the end of the presentation as well, in case any of you want to get involved in some federal policy stuff as well. So we can go to the next slide, Lisa. And the next slide will just, it's just going to show a table with some of the, it kind of shows the increases over the years for different relevant federal programs. We also have a full funding chart. It's up on our website. I can send the link in the chat as well, but this that one has a more comprehensive look at some other programs, some more that are under HUD and different agencies or for higher education and so on and so forth. But this is just to give you all a preliminary overview. And I'm happy to make this presentation available to you all as well after, in case you want to take a look. So we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so one of our other priorities is the new Higher Education Access and Success for Homeless and Foster Youth Act, or HESHFI, as we lovingly call it at SHC. So last December, we also saw something happen, which was really incredible. And it came after literally a decade of advocacy. we saw the passage of the FAFSA Simplification Act. And what that bill did is it removed several barriers to higher education for homeless and foster youth in terms of accessing financial aid and receiving assistance, redetermination of status and eliminating the need for redetermination of status, and a lot of wonderful things, which we also have a summary on our website. But there's still more to be done. So one of the things that we are looking towards is the reintroduction of HEASH fee, and the policy would remove the requirement for unaccompanied homeless youth to have their status redetermined annually. It would allow additional entities to make determinations of unaccompanied homeless youth status, require financial aid administrators to make determinations for unaccompanied homeless youth who cannot obtain documentation from third parties, and other provisions. So next slide, please. So what else is happening on Capitol Hill? So something which, if you have been paying attention to the news, you've probably seen a lot going on in terms of like Congress, parties, moderates, progressives going against each other. And a lot of it is related to this bill right here, the Build Back Better Act. So you can go to the next slide, Lisa. So the Build Back Better Act is it's not an act as yet, actually, that's my bad because it has not been passed as yet, but the Build Back Better bill, which is currently in talks right now, it's a Democrat-led social spending bill, which would invest in childcare, housing, early education, higher education, Medicare, climate change, and other areas. So the House recently, last Friday, they voted to advance the bill to a final vote on the floor, which means a lot of progress has been made, like just them reaching to that stage, but there's still a long way to go. There's still lots of discussions that are underway in the House itself between different factions and different parties, but the same is going on in the Senate as well for this. And there is a lot of talk that it might stall in the Senate, but that's why the discussions are being had right now to see what compromise can be made so that we can get the bill passed, and it would have the largest amount of investments in housing and childcare and lots of other stuff that we're going to get into soon. But yeah, we definitely want to see this progress. So we can go to the next slide to see what it actually means for homeless children, youth, and families. So under childcare, the Build Back Better proposal would establish a new birth through 5 childcare and early learning entitlement to provide direct childcare services for low and lower income children who are under the age of 6 and not yet enrolled in a K through 12 school. So under this title, there are restrictions for parents, or requirements rather, for parents to have either be employed, to be in school, or to be on a certified work leave, like an official work leave, and just those kinds of requirements. But for children experiencing homelessness, children who are in foster care or kinship care, they are categorically eligible for this program, and their parents would not be subject to the requirements of working or being in school and all of that jazz. So in this, the bill also specifies that state plans have to demonstrate that states will prioritize increasing access to and outreach and supply of childcare for underserved populations. And there's a group of them, but of course included in that are children experiencing homelessness and children who are in foster care. So I can go to the next slide to hear about universal pre-K. So another thing that the proposal would do is it would set up a 6-year preschool program for 3- and 4-year-old children to be administered by the Department of Health and Human Services in coordination with the Department of Education. So under this includes, like, eligible grantees include childcare programs, local educational agencies, and Head Start programs as well. So grantees for the program will be required to adopt policies and practices to conduct outreach to children experiencing homelessness and their families, provide them with expedited enrollment and prioritization. Grantees who are LEAs or local educational agencies are also required to follow the same procedures that are included in the McKinney-Vento Act, which means that children experiencing homelessness would also have immediate enrollment in addition to expedited enrollment and all of this Wonderful stuff. And this also extends to children with disabilities, children in foster care, dual language learners, and children in families that participate in migrant labor or seasonal agricultural labor. And it also, this was a wonderful thing that was included as well, but children experiencing homelessness will receive transportation services. So grantees are required to provide transportation services for young children who are experiencing homelessness so that they're able to really benefit from this and to make the program truly universal, because it's one thing to just have it available, but another thing for it to truly be accessible for students. So we can go to the next slide, Lisa. So housing. So, as I mentioned, if the Build Back Better proposal goes through, this will be the largest investment in the housing space ever. So it would provide $25 billion in rental assistance. But under this funding and under this title, many of these programs are going to be provided through HUD. If you all are service providers or even liaisons, you may be familiar with the issues that children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness have in accessing services through HUD because of the definitions and the conflicts that arise there. But families experiencing homelessness or individuals who are at risk of homelessness, which is basically how HUD classifies persons who are experiencing doubled up homelessness or who are staying in hotels, motels, and those other forms of homelessness. So they will be eligible for a specific $7.2 billion carve-out that will be included within this $25 billion of rental assistance. So that's there. There's also $300 million that will be provided for mobility-related services, and another $230 million for landlord incentives for them to participate in the program. There's also $65 billion for public housing and to improve affordable housing infrastructure, and another $15 billion to go towards the National Housing Trust Fund to work on the creation of new rental homes for low-income households. Next slide, please. And I think this is the last one on Build Back Better, the Earned Income Tax Credit. So we were very happy to see it back in March with the American Rescue Plan that there was included the expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit to homeless and foster youth who are at least 18, they will now, or in the American Rescue Plan Act, they were able to access housing that is subsidized under the Earned Income Tax Credit while being full-time students. Because before this, students who were under the age of 24 and under would not be able to live in this housing, or they would not be able to receive Earned Income Tax Credit if they were full-time students, which would basically make students have to choose between full-time education and housing. Because if they wanted to receive that housing, they would have to switch to part-time, which not everyone wants to do, and that may not be the best thing for everyone, of course. So this was included in the American Rescue Plan Act, and this is something that's also proposed in the Build Back Better Act. So this would extend this for one more year, because in the American Rescue Plan Act, it was only specified for 1 year. So this will include it for one more year, where these students will be able to claim the Earned Income Tax Credit, even if they are full-time students and working, because current law does prohibit full-time students from doing so. And it also increases the maximum credit claim for a childless claimant from $1,502, to $1,502 from its previous level. Next slide, please. And this is just for everyone. Like, if you want to stay up to date on the issues, you can, if you want to see if your member has signed on to any legislation that you see us pushing, you can go to congress.gov and of course type in the bill number and the name, and you'll find all the great information there. But if you want an even more personal touch, I am open to you all. Please feel free to shoot me an email. I saw that Patricia dropped my email in the chat, and it's also right here for everyone. If you want to find out about the issues, stay updated. If you want to get involved in anything more than you're already doing for the state policy community of practice and in your regular daily lives, then, of course, reach out to me. You can also sign up for SchoolHouse Connections e-newsletter if you haven't already. I promise we have really great graphics in there. Our comms director, he makes them look amazing. Plus, they also have really great information. So I might be a little bit biased, but I do recommend it. And you can also check out our federal policy page. And with that, I think I'm done.
Thank you. All right, let's see if I can stop screen sharing. Here we go. Okay, so couple things from the chat. So Patricia shared a note about stipends. If you're a youth with lived experience under age 25 and you haven't directly communicated with Patricia on this call, please send her an email or chat to her so she can make sure you get your stipend. She also gave Alian's email address. I will also make sure that everyone has Heather and Cameron's in case it was hard to pull off of their screens. It looks like Patricia shared a couple of other documents from SchoolHouse Connection on funding and also Build Back Better. Please check those out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that the documents that Heather had to share, which is Heather and Cameron's slides, and also their PDF that has the chart with all of the specific legislation, is added to our whiteboard so that you guys can all access it there. I'm going to put the whiteboard link again. I'm not sure I'm good enough at multitasking to do that while we were on the call, but I promise I will do it the second we get off. So all of that is housekeeping. I want to leave a little bit of time. That was so much great information. We really, really appreciate all of you presenting it. So I really want to leave some time for questions because there was so much good information there, but I would be surprised if there are no questions about it. So questions about the content, questions about where do we go from here? You know, this session is really year in review, but also year ahead. So if you have any questions about, you know, how can we accomplish more in our state? How can we support Schoolhouse in this federal advocacy? Anything like that, please either unmute or go ahead and add that into the chat. Okay, while you guys are thinking about that, I'm going to put a few things back into the chat. So let's see, I'm going to start with putting the virtual whiteboard so you can click on that link, and soon I will add the PowerPoint. And then I'm also going to put our poll again.
I have a quick question for Alianne, and I actually don't know the answer to this, Alianne, even though I talk to you every day. I mean, given what you know, your inside information, if you were a betting person, like, is any version of Build Back Better going to pass or what? Like, what do you think?
That's a great question. I actually do believe so. I actually do believe that it is possible, but I just believe that the way that it looks right now really might not be the way that it looks when it does pass, if it does pass. I believe that there's probably going to be, or it's very likely that there might be a lot of paring down of what's included in it, because there's right now, one of the holdups for an actual vote on the House is they need, well, there are like moderate Democrats in the House who requested a score from the Congressional Budget Office on, you know, just the fiscal impact of this legislation. And I know that the CBO, I think they came out earlier today, I think, if not yesterday, to say that they're going to need some more time to do it. It's going to be like a long process, and it's, you know, all that stuff, which doesn't necessarily look the best. And moderates are saying that their support is kind of contingent on this, and you know, making sure that the fiscal impact is not going to be super great. So, you know, with something of this size, it's very likely that it's just going to be a lot more contentious going forward, especially because one of the things that progressives who are, you know, of course, more robustly supportive of this bill were kind of like using as leverage was refraining from taking a vote on the infrastructure bill. So those are the two bills that were the big omnibus bills that were being debated in Congress for the past few months. The infrastructure bill actually passed the House. So it passed both chambers last week, Friday. It's on the desk of the president right now. So there's no more leverage to be had. So basically all they have to do is compromise and collaborate, you know, across the aisle or across ideology lines even to get this done. So it's very possible that it will just look very different, but I do believe that it's possible to get something done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's encouraging. So I put in the chat, but a couple of things, I'm going to open it up for a few things. If anyone wants to share policy victories that you didn't get a chance to share earlier, policy priorities for 2022. I saw a couple of people added that on our whiteboard. And any questions for any of the speakers. We're opening up for all of those things now. I feel like this is a quieter group than usual. I think there's just so much good information. Everyone is still absorbing it. So I'm going to still leave it open if people want to ask questions, but I'm also going to make sure that you have contact information for the speakers in the chat so that if you want to reach out directly after the fact, you are able to do that. Patricia, anything you want to add for everyone?
Just a lot of gratitude for Heather and Cameron and Alianne for your presentations and your expertise. It's been, an interesting year, interesting couple of years in state and federal policy, but so much has happened. And so just having this opportunity to step back and have an overview and see the trends in state policy nationally, as well as where we stand federally, it's been really helpful to me. So I appreciate all three of you.
Yeah, thanks for having us here today.
Absolutely, yeah, agreed. Thank you for having us. Happy to be here.
I say ditto.
Sorry?
Ditto.
Oh, okay. So you all have everyone's contact information. Patricia, unless you have anything else to share, we'll move into next steps. And my final plea to everyone to go ahead and fill out our survey. So, I mean, basically, we are not going to have a December meeting. We think that people probably have too many other things going on, but we will definitely be back in January. We hope that you will fill out this survey because it will help us really determine what is going to be most useful to you for the year ahead. So please do that. And then if you all have my email address, I'll put it in here too. If you, after completing the survey or anytime in the future, see a topic or have a question that you think would be a good fit for this forum, always feel free to email and just say, could we have a session on this? Do you know anyone we could talk to about that? Those types of things would be terrific. And I'm going to put my email in one more time. And I'm going to thank everyone else for coming, unless any of my Schoolhouse friends want to join in or jump in. I'm not seeing anyone. Okay, here's my email. Thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful end of your year. I hope lots more victories to come. And please keep in touch with us. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Everyone.